Welcome to OAC Vancouver's podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We believe that Jesus is needed and relevant for people in Vancouver today. The message of God's love and promise of wholeness was destined to be experienced within a faith community that worships, studies scripture, and prays together. We warmly welcome you to journey with us towards greater connection, purpose, and peace. We'll be sharing our recorded services and conversations with health and wellness experts. Enjoy.
Hi, my name is Dan and welcome to the OAC Vancouver podcast. Today we have DK. Welcome, DK.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, just kind of to clarify any confusion, we're both named Daniel.
Yeah.
In this podcast, is it okay that you go by DK?
Yeah, for sure. It's what I go by with most of my friends anyway, so it's not too unfamiliar.
Oh, sounds good. What did you eat for breakfast?
What I eat for breakfast? Well, I don't really eat breakfast because I'm too tired or too groggy in the morning to eat. But if I were to choose, I would say I would have to go with bagels.
Oh, what kind of bagels?
I mean, to be honest, I have a little story since when I was grade 1 because I didn't know English at the time, and I was on a trip by myself to New York to see my relatives, and I was through this guided program. And I remember they handed out food, and I was so intrigued because I didn't know anything. And I ate this round shaped bread with a hole in the middle with some kind of cream in it. And when I bit into it, I was always immediately in love. And I had no idea how to ask for more or what it was. I didn't know how to communicate. And years later, I'm watching the Philadelphia cream cheese commercial, and then I had this flashback to that moment I had a bagel, and I've been in love with bagel since. It doesn't matter what kind of bagel it is.
So I know if I need to ask for a favor, I'll come with you with a bagel first.
Yeah, man.
In terms of what profession are you working in right now?
Well, I work as the children and youth coordinator, ministry coordinator at OAC. But yeah, I mean, as far as what I do, I'm just coordinating meetups and making sure that the youth and children get what they need in the church and support and organization of some kind.
So given that you work with youth and children, just because we know young adult has kind of a weird age range, especially, what age ranges do you primarily work with?
So I would work with I'm not sure on the lower end, but as far as children's church go, I've had toddlers. I would say probably grade 1 to grade 12 is what I usually work with.
Have you always had an interest in working with younger people?
I actually studied to become a pastor, but it's a separate thing. And I didn't think I'd go into children's ministry per se, but I think growing up, if I look back, I've always babysat my younger brother's kids. I was always the oldest out of my parents' kids and their friends' kids. So I've always babysat, and I think I've grown accustomed to watching kids and just enjoying their innocent playing. Maybe I think I'm just a child at heart too, because I play like them.
What kind of different concerns do kids have than adults for upbringing as you work with them?
I would say kids don't really have long-term worries, right? Because they're just so in the moment, and which is what I like about the kids, because they live in the moment, right? But as far as it depends, right? You work with children, they're worried about what they're going to play after this game, or how they're going to have fun or whatever. But maybe with the youth, they start worrying about their next step in life and future, and when you become an adult, then you're just constantly worried about everything, I guess.
Given that you worked from grade 1, when do you start seeing worry in each of you?
That's a good question. Maybe psychologically, I'm not really qualified to answer this question, but I could tell you from personal experience, just the different age ranges that I like to work with and where it gets a little bit more challenging. But I guess I love the younger kids because all you have to do is entertain them, and they're good and they're happy and they like you right away, and as long as you play with them. And then I think I start noticing in grade 3, it's when like the innocence meets intelligence, and that's when like they start having a little bit more distinct personalities and distinct likes and dislikes and whatnot. That's where it's like super, super adorable. And then grade 5 and 6 is when they start like worrying about middle school and start worrying about what's cool, what's not cool, and start suddenly the peers really dictate what they like and dislike, and where they get their approval really shapes how they act and behave around people. So, and then after that, junior high is really just crazy. And high school then high school they calm down again, from what I've noticed.
Did you originally grow up in BC?
No, I'm actually from Alberta. Yeah, I think I lived in all different parts of Alberta. I came from Korea to Edmonton, to Calgary, to Central Alberta. Yeah, I was just everywhere, I guess.
What age did you come from Korea?
When I was 7, that's when we immigrated from Korea. We came straight to Edmonton.
So you kind of alluded to this earlier. You came and you didn't know English, I assume, or did you know?
Yeah. Well, I studied English when I was there, like in the school, but like I knew some words, but I just remember in grade 1. Like, what do I know in grade 1? I know some words, but that's it.
Do you have family history of Adventism going back generations?
No, I would say I'm a first-gen Adventist. My parents and myself really got introduced to it together, but my parents are not Adventist, or they're more agnostic than they are anything else, I think.
So when you're introduced, I imagine there was some point in time you wanted to move forward with it. Well, perhaps your family was still pondering. Was it really early in life?
Well, I think it was gradual, because what had happened is I think it's a God, it's a God moment. It's like a God leading my life, and that's in my family's life. But when we first came to Canada, their first friends, or the friends that they knew that were out here, were Adventist, and so they would bring us to church. I think my parents asked the pastor for some help and support, and in turn, because my parents' kids went to an Adventist school in Edmonton, I also went to that school too, just because of familiarity, and that's how I got introduced to Adventism and Christianity. But like, we aren't really Christian then, and and then like I said, I gradually moved towards Calgary, and in between, I lived in like Central Alberta, that you guys probably never heard of, but like I went to a public school. But when I got to Calgary, the same friends we met in Edmonton were in Calgary by then, and my parents decided to send me to the Adventist school there again, because I think they saw that I liked the Adventist school system. But even then, I wasn't Adventist right away. I remember just arguing at recess with like my classmates about evolution, and they're like, no, it's creation. And I was all about evolution and science and all that stuff. But I think by the time I was junior high, yeah, that's when I really just learned a lot about God and started being intrigued by it.
Random tangent. Have you visited any Korean Adventist churches back in Korea?
No, it's like after I grew up, I became Adventist like when I was in junior high, and I was like baptized in a big conservative church here, but like I wasn't aware how big the Adventist culture in Korea was at the time. But and then I found out that Koreans have there's a lot of Korean Adventists, and there's a school there, and there's a big community of Adventists there. But to be honest, I didn't study the Bible in Korean, so it's very difficult for me, because like the biblical language in Korean, it's like maybe equivalent to like reading the King James version of the Bible for English people, right? So I have no idea any of the names or any of the big words, the biblical words. So I've been kind of shying away from churches, Korean churches.
The only reason I asked is I actually I was visiting Seoul with some friends.
Oh, cool.
We went to Korean church, and it was like I had no idea what was going on. It seemed nice. It was next to a soy milk factory, which I found was intriguing. I think.
Yeah, there is a big soy milk thing there. Yeah, I remember. That's cool.
Huh.
Yeah.
This is interesting.
Yeah, I think I drank that soy milk growing up, but like not as an Adventist because it's just kind of a big brand there. And then I found out that that brand is Adventist way later on in life, which is interesting.
After junior high, so grade 7-ish, when you went to university, what did you decide to study?
Oh man, like this whole path is like a God story in itself. And when I became an Adventist in junior high, I started making like lifestyle changes of my interests and all that stuff. And it wasn't until my first mission trip from the school to Jamaica, and then I had this moment of like Holy Spirit moment where I was like, if I felt touched by the idea of doing something for God, doing things for people for God. And I remember at the time the pastor was like, man, DK, you'd be a great pastor. What have you, thought about what being a pastor? And I was in grade 10. And I remember I was really stuck on that. And I was like, really like, oh, it intrigued me and I liked the idea. But over the next 2 years, they really steered me away. My parents were like, you have to be a doctor of some kind, typical Asians. And, even the spiritual mentors I had at the time were like, hey, there are other ways to serve God. You don't have to be so fixated on being a pastor or whatnot. And by the time I hit college, I was really like discouraged from it. So I switched to the next best thing to spiritual counseling, which is normal counseling. So I studied psychology my first year in college, but the story goes on to another God moment, I guess, later on where I switch back to religious studies.
So did you finish up with religious studies or what did you end up finishing up?
I did. I did finish up with religious studies, pre-professional tracks. It's like it's like a pastoral track, I guess. It's not just like religious studies. It's like a specific program where pastors study to become pastors, I guess. Most pastors, I guess, like take that track or whatever. But yeah, there's like actually kind of a funny story when I switched. I remember I was telling my parents, it was my first year I finished my psychology and I was like struggling with it because in my heart I wanted to do something else, right? Or I wasn't fully sure about it. It was kind of like a plan B. And my second year in my first semester, I prayed, for like friends that would help me in this walk. And that's when I met a lot of my friends and the friends I still talk to this day and people who support me through this walk, my faith journey. But yeah, I remember talking to them really reminded me of my convictions, when I had in grade 10, and I was really convicted to switch back. So then after the end of the first semester, I went back home for Christmas break. My parents gave me a card, like a Christmas card saying like, wow, like we're proud of all that you've done and all that you're doing. And we support you in whatever you do. And no matter what, we'll support you and we love you so much, right? And I was like, wow, this is great. So I went to my parents and I was like, hey, do you really mean these words? And they're like, yeah, of course. Like we'll support you in anything. And they're like, well, I want to switch to religious studies. And they're stunned because they couldn't take back those words and they were really kind of against it. So I remember having that funny moment. But since then I switched and they've been supportive since. So
Wow, that's pretty bold for any parents to give that. I don't know, especially in the Asian community. It's
yeah.
very
Yeah,
honest, not a
yeah, I saw the mixed emotions happening. And honestly, my journey has been I had to choose God, beyond like the people around me, because they weren't like I grew up in a non-Christian home and all my parents' friends and all the people around me were non-Christian. So I had to really double down for my faith, or else I wouldn't have made it. So yeah, it was a pretty big moment, but it was just funny to see their mixed emotions because they couldn't take back what they said, but really they were not happy about it.
Just curious, do you still have that card today?
No, I honestly, I'm not a very sentimental guy, but like I've been keeping a lot of things that are uh, related to my faith journey, like maybe sermons or little cards or whatever, like related to my faith journey into a little binder or whatever. But that's one I don't think I have, so I am kind of sad about that.
Earlier, you were talking about pursuing a pastoral path. So, how's that journey now?
Wow, man, yeah, these are good questions, and these are deep thoughts that I've been wrestling with. So, I had to double down, like I said, with my faith and really buy into it 100% to be able to stand confidently in front of my parents or those people, like, my close family and friends, right? And yeah, I think I quickly got into this mindset of what I think a pastor should look like. And when I was studying religious studies, I was really fixated on my behavior. And if I'm going to be a pastor, I need to have this sorted out and that sorted out, and this figured out and that figured out. And really, like, it became more about the behavior than about my genuine journey with God. And I think that really took a toll on my faith. I wouldn't say it was a negative; it was a realization that I needed to have, right? So, but it did take a toll, like, on me. And I remember as I was graduating, I just had I had a struggle to decide where I wanted to go, because on the one side, I know what I think, um, you know, a pastor should look like behaviorally, but I didn't quite feel that way. But also to, um, you know, what I felt, my convictions didn't quite line up with um, the pastoral ministry. And then there was like a whole mix of emotion. And I think I took a step back from that whole journey to figure out just my relationship with God and my walk with God. So after graduation, I worked at a nonprofit organization serving kids. That's where this whole kids ministry came to be, where I worked with, kids and youth in vulnerable places and single parent homes and low income families, in a Christian nonprofit organization, to just share with them the gospel or feed them food or teach them life lessons and all that. But all the meanwhile, just really reflecting on my walk with God. And that was very important for me, because I think that's where my faith also took a turning point for the better. I really started developing a personal relationship with God that, obviously I didn't grow up Christian, so I didn't have the fundamentals or the idea on how to do it. So that was a very important time in my life to build that.
So, given that you entered the first job outside of university, like, how was that experience? Was it like what you expected? Did you find that you were able to, like, do you enjoy it better? Some people like school better than work. Like,
Right.
How do you feel about starting your first job?
I think we all have expectations of like what life might look like and what it should feel like and whatnot. And I think that's what maybe I was kind of thrown off by in the beginning, even with my first initial choice to become a pastor. A lot of my expectations didn't line up with the reality. And that, I think, is the same for first, like, life after school. There's like a lot of expectations that you have, things that you underestimate and things that you overestimate, right? Things that, like, bills and how you have to grind and how society can be, you know, pretty brutal, and but you have to survive. But on the other hand, there are things that you could figure out about yourself and life and just personally, because you have the freedom to. You're not guided by school, and maybe you're not guided by the expectations of, or at least the expectations you make up in your head. But yeah, it was very interesting to discover. It was good. I think it was really good, and that I got to discover a lot of my likes and dislikes when it comes to ministry.
I think expectations are kind of reality for a lot of people on there. Did you feel that it was unsaid expectations? Sometimes Asian communities have some, as you mentioned, right? Doctor, engineer, lawyer.
Yes.
Do you feel like some of those were more from like school or family, or how did your sense of expectations kind of line up?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above, right? There's like societal expectations where, society says you have to be this successful by this age, to consider successful, or you have to be this, that, you have to have this figured out. And then there's like expectations from your parents on what they want from you and whatever. And maybe there's set expectations on what you think is something that'll make God proud, or something that will make your parents proud, or whatever, right? And there's all these expectations that come into play. But it's interesting for me, I guess the heaviest expectation came from the idea that because my parents aren't Christian and they know about God, they've heard and read, the Bible and the Adventist doctrine, and they agreed with it for a lot of it. And it was like the hurt from the church that led them away. But so for me, like, I think in my mind, my first concern is to minister to my parents, right? To show my parents God. And for a long time, I had this pressure, and maybe still do now in a way, that I have to succeed in this spiritual journey to be able to fully show my parents God. So despite what their expectations, which I'm sure they've given up because they realize I'm going to do what I want anyway. But as for me, I have this idea that, or a prayer, that once they see the journey that God is taking me through and where I actually land and the type of person that I become, I'm hoping that that's a testament to who God is and God being real, for sure.
What are you kind of excited for the next couple of years?
What am I excited for?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I came to BC with in a step of faith to see now that my faith and my walk with God is a little bit more defined and a little bit more confident where God could lead me next, because my heart is in ministry and my heart has always been to serve in any way I can. Isn't that like really what we're trying to figure out in life, like how we fit into contributing to society? Where do we fit and how do we give back, right? And I haven't maybe quite found the lane. I've been using my skill sets here and there in places, and I've been grateful to figure that out in my life. But really, I take a step in faith to see where God's going to lead me when it comes to ministry and how I can give back all that I've learned and all that I've gained over the past years. And yeah.
Ministry has, I think the term has kind of changed.
Yes.
Past, I don't know, a decade or more, right? It used to be very traditional ways, like you do this, you go another country, come back. Like,
right.
How has your view of ministry changed?
Oh man, I kind of have a pet peeve of the word ministry because of what it's become, right? Because like the idea that God, like Jesus says, is like really we're to love people and let our love be a representation of God's love in this, like a snippet of it, right? And that's what's supposed to draw them towards God, because ultimately what he is love, right? And all that we do should reflect that. But somehow along the way, ministry became this active verb that we're supposed to take this person from point A to point B. And we have this way to gauge, and that we have these ambitions that people sense, and then people are kind of drawn away from that, right? They're like, oh man, this guy wants something from me, instead of simply just loving me or simply just showing love and whatever. So there's a little bit of a pet peeve when it comes to the word ministry, because I think also ministry might be more correlated to church, when ministry can be doing anything in the name of God, right? So that word has a little bit of a negative connotation for me, but I think the heart of it, I still agree with it, and the essence of it, I'm still in love with. So
working with younger people, I think it's you have a viewpoint, probably you're similar in the realm of teachers and those professions, to work with the younger generation and see perhaps paradigm shifts or different ways of how they consume things. Working with
Yeah.
the younger generation, what do you think is a more effective, let's say, I know we talk about ministry as an active work, like way of like connecting them with God compared to times past?
Right. Yeah. I mean, like I said, like, yeah, it's become an active thing, but really, the passive thing of the word ministry is to really love and connect. And, um, you know, that's been harder, I think, lately because there's a lot of things maybe preventing us from connection. I'm sure that's what the devil plans to do, right? The devil over the years are going to find ways for people to not connect with each other, right? It starts from the home. That's why maybe divorce rates are high, whatever they like these different ways to disconnect people and create a world of, fast-paced, what do you call that? Instant gratification type of life. When the good things in life takes time, right? Like it actually takes time to develop and all that stuff. So yeah, for sure the expectations of the kids have maybe shifted in that they're just so used to everything just being quick and easy, and there's the depth is harder to teach the kids. But really, I think when it comes down to ministry, it is still simple in that we're really here to connect with people. And I think in whatever way thing you do, as long as you're connecting with people, God's love will shine and God's message will be told and shared. And I think connection with self is a huge part that I'm sure gets neglected, in time too, right? Self-reflection, having a place to meditate and pray, and these things are also neglected, under taught how to do properly. And yeah, I think this is all a way to disconnect everyone from yourself, from each other. So as long as we can figure ways to connect with each other, even in this generation, I know people will respond well.
Do you have any particular faith defining moments in your life?
Yeah. Like I said, I have shared, my time in Jamaica when I had felt this, when I felt the joy of serving for God. And there was a time in my life where I felt peace for the first time in my crazy family, and like the craziness of it all. I felt God's peace for the first time, and I was like, man, like this is why I follow God. And switching to theology, changing up my views of traditions of God and all that stuff. But I guess one thing I haven't really shared, and I think something that I think really defined my walk with God is, after graduation, like I said, I took this time to figure out my relationship with God. And I had to really, really unlearn some of these religious behaviors that was taught to me. And I'm not saying it was maliciously taught to me, but just like these expectations that like, oh, if you're doing devotions, you're good with God. So if you don't do devotions by default, you might not be good with God. And these are the type of things that was kind of embedded in my psyche. And I think after graduation, I really had to reflect and contemplate every one of my actions. And for a time, I stopped reading the Bible. For a time, I stopped doing devotions. For a time, I stopped doing anything. But I just really prayed, and I really wanted to get to the heart of why I do what I do and why I should do these things. And there was like things like religious guilt that was lingering, but it wasn't a guilt from God. It was a guilt that was taught to me by religion, right? So when I got rid of all these different religious guilts and the oughts and things that I need to do, traditions that I do mindlessly, and when I broke that all down and really got back to the essence of like, who am I doing it for and why I should do it, and why does God ask this of me, and why, how does this bring joy in my life, and why does God ask me to follow him? All these different things. As I questioned it and answered it, it was a really big turning point in my life as it became really personal to me.
On a lighter note, is there a hobby you have that nobody knows about?
Yeah, I'm not one to share much of myself usually. So like a lot of people might not even know that I play like music or piano or something, right? But other than like the classic hobbies most people have, sports, music, gaming, I think the one niche hobby that I have, kind of a nerdy one, is that I like custom keyboards or like customizing like little gadgets. So I like solder different parts into the PCB to make it my own, and I like to lube different like parts of the keyboard to make it, there's a huge keyboard community, but I would say like building custom keyboards is like that's a hobby of mine that I think no one knows about.
You mean keyboards for computers?
Computers, yeah, computer keyboards.
I walked down that path very briefly because I was like,
Oh yeah, so you know how expensive it is.
yeah, I was like, oh, there's these Cherry MX switches, which are quiet, and I can replace them. And I was like, oh, you can do this too. And I was like, whoa, this is like a rabbit hole I never knew existed.
It's a rabbit hole that is not meant for saving money, that's for sure.
Well, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me once again. Yeah. Thank you for listening to OAC Vancouver's podcast. Learn more at oacvancouver.ca. If you're in Vancouver, join us for worship Saturdays at 11 a.m. at 5350 Bailey Street. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate, review, and subscribe. God bless you and have a wonderful day.